Good morning, it's February 22nd, and this is To My Liberal Friends. So what kind of report card would you give President Joe Biden for his first 2 years? Do you think that he's succeeding or failing? To get a true report card, we have to look at the subject matter that he's been taking in school. The first and most important subject is the economy. This is the subject that ordinary people we see affecting us each and every day. As part of the economy that we see the most is inflation. When Biden came into office, inflation was running about 1.4%. By now, we all know that it took off and peaked at around 9%. This number has short-term and long-term effects. In the short term, it caused manufacturers and producers to raise their prices. Those prices were passed on to the public by the sellers of those products and the services. One of the key components of rising prices was a soaring price of energy, particularly gas and diesel fuel. The price of a gallon of gas went from just above $2 per gallon to about $5 per gallon. It's eased off somewhat, but it still remains around $3.50 per gallon. The Biden administration made a decision to infuse trillions of dollars into the economy in the form of stimulus bills. They defended this decision by saying the pandemic forced them to do it, but in the end it produced a situation where there were too many dollars chasing too few goods, and that meant prices for those goods go up. Unemployment benefits were increased during the pandemic, and in many cases, the results were a worker could make more income staying home than taking a job. Stimulus checks were sent to families with income thresholds so high that just about everyone was getting them, whether they needed them or not. Millions of people were receiving these government checks in the mail even though they continued to work and earn their normal income. Today, inflation is still historically high. It's tapered off, but the movement has been slow and has stayed above 6% year over year each month. One of the final major bills that Congress passed in the waning weeks of the last Congress was the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. Most experts reviewed the bill and determined it was just another tax and spend bill and would have no impact on inflation, and time to this date has proven them correct. The major factor in reducing inflation is the current number has been the action of the Federal Reserve increasing interest rates. Now, I mentioned that the rate of inflation would have some long-term effects, and one of those is Social Security. This year, checks were increased 8.7%, and that means Social Security funds will be exhausted sooner than previously expected. That's going to cause some problems that we're going to have to take action on, as I mentioned yesterday. The overall grade on the economy, I give Biden a D-. The next issue is immigration. I don't think we need to really discuss Biden's plan on this subject because most of us have come to realize he has no plan. He put Vice President Kamala Harris in charge of the southern border. Now, how many of you think the Vice President handled this task with any level of expertise? She's failed to visit the border, and she's been in office for almost 25 months. She's not even proposed any plan to solve the crisis, even though she repeatedly tells us it's not a crisis, and has told everyone that the southern border is secure. Her go-to comments have been that the immigration system was broken by the Trump administration and needs to be fixed. To be exact, this is her comment, quote, "The border is secure, but we also have a broken immigration system. In particular, over the last 4 years before we came in, it needs to be fixed," end quote. Well, today we're experiencing record numbers of illegal immigrants, with the average at about 200,000 per month, the highest in the history of the country. When interviewed, many of these immigrants say they thought Joe Biden told them to come, and that they would be allowed to enter the country. They turn themselves in and say they want to claim asylum, but the truth of the matter is they're coming for what they perceive as an economic reason. These numbers do not fully include the getaways that enter the country either undetected or those that are just able to get away from Border Patrol officers. The drug cartels are controlling the border, making billions of dollars by charging immigrants thousands of dollars to be able to cross. Some are forced to smuggle drugs in the United States. Some even die in their attempts to enter this country. On immigration and the southern border, I would give Biden an F because that's the lowest grade I can give him. If we were giving him a 1 to 100, we'd give him a 0. Foreign relations is another subject. Every president has to determine their foreign policy stance. For Biden, the major issue has been the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But you have to also take into account the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was a major catastrophe. Yes, he extracted us from a 20-year war, but at the cost of 13 American lives and leaving millions of dollars of military equipment in the hands of the Taliban. Looking at Ukraine, it was obvious that the United States and NATO had to come to the aid of this country. Most thought it would take Russia about a week to bring Ukraine to surrender. But what we now find is that Russia is a poorly trained and poorly equipped military. Biden vacillated in providing Ukraine with the necessary weapons, and he still does that today. He seems more concerned about what Vladimir Putin will think than taking decisive action. There's an old adage, he who hesitates is lost. Biden seems to hesitate on all foreign policy decisions, and the shooting down of the Chinese spy balloon was just another case where he could not pull the trigger in a decisive manner. So on foreign policy, I'm going to be kind and give him a C. Finally, we look at his goal of uniting the nation. In his inaugural address, he talked about unity, and throughout the past 2 years, he's done nothing but divide us as a nation. He goes to terms like MAGA Republicans to insult people. He tells us it's us against them over and over. He refuses to really work with the Republicans in Congress. So on uniting the nation, he gets another F. And when you look at all these grades, you would have to conclude that he is close to failing and probably, if he were in school, be made to repeat the grade. But in this case, he gets to stay in the grade for another 2 years, and hopefully by then we will expel him. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, recommend it to your friends and hit the subscribe button.